Nothing in the galaxy truly ends, it only fades until memory becomes the new form of existence. And so it was with the green star. Centuries passed, then millennia. Maps changed, empires cracked. The warp breathed differently now, quieter in places once known for endless screaming. The Imperium called it the Age of Remembering, though few remembered what they were supposed to be remembering. Yet, scattered across 1,000 star systems, in the corners of worlds too poor for conquest and too stubborn for annihilation, stories persisted. They spoke of a light that once silenced storms, a man who refused to kneel, a door that never closed. In the frozen mines of Velis 9, workers swore that if you touched your bare hand to the railings before shift change and whispered the words, "Still here," the machines wouldn't jam. On the pilgrim roads of Holy Terror, children traced small rectangles with their palms on the sides of shrines, not crosses, not aquilas, but hinges. The priests tried to correct them. The children didn't stop. And on Mars, deep beneath the cathedrals of data, a single Mechanicus canticle circulated, unsigned and heretical, yet never deleted. To maintain is divine. To remember is holy. The machine endures those who endure themselves. They called it the hymn of the unbroken circuit. Its rhythm matched the old pulse of the green star. Time, which devours gods and civilizations with equal hunger, had softened even chaos. Khorne still raged, but his champions now spoke in whispers about worthy silences. Tzench still schemed, but sometimes left the threads untied, curious what mortals might invent unprompted. Slaanesh had begun to fear boredom more than failure. And Nurgle laughed less, because laughter now reminded him of compassion. None of them understood why their storms weakened near the galactic core. None of them dared to say the name they no longer believed was a name at all. Inquisitor-historian Lyris Ventane stumbled upon that name by accident. He was searching for heresy in a Warden archive hidden beneath the ruins of the old Segmentum Obscurus. He found stories instead. 1,000 ship logs, personal diaries, mechanics reports, and children's rhymes, all describing the same thing in different languages. A pulse in the dark that made the void bearable. The earliest records dated back 10,000 years. They mentioned a green sun, a man of silence, and something called the Quiet Offensive. Lyris thought it was myth, until he touched one of the hinges stored in the vault. It hummed, and for a moment, the air around him bent with a familiar warmth, a pressure that felt like gravity mixed with empathy. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed not by holiness, but by recognition. He wasn't supposed to remember, but his blood did. "He's still here," Lyris whispered, and the hinge pulsed once in reply. He carried it with him back to Terra. He showed it to no one, not even the Ordo Chronos priests who begged to see the relic. Instead, he placed it quietly in the center of his desk and began writing. The testament of the Green God. Not scripture, not propaganda, just truth, or something close enough to resemble it when written with patience and humility. It began with a simple line. "In the darkness, something once refused to be dark." He wrote for 40 years. Every chapter was a reconstruction pieced together from the accounts of wardens, the descendants of quiet engineers, and what few songs remained from the choir of ashes. He did not embellish. He did not preach. He simply documented what it felt like to endure without permission. When he finished, he sealed the text and sent it into the void aboard a single drone, marked only with the words, "For whoever still builds." The drone never returned, but the testament did. Decades later, fragments of the text began appearing across the galaxy, printed on ration wrappers, tattooed on skin, carved into the sides of bulkheads. The words traveled faster than ships. They were not worshipped, they were used. In the hives, workers quoted the testament to remind themselves that machinery once served life, not the other way around. In the guard, veterans etched its phrases into the barrels of their lasguns, claiming it made the recoil steadier. Even the Mechanicus began to embed short lines of it into machine code, hidden like blessings disguised as bugs. The galaxy had found a new scripture, one that didn't promise salvation, only endurance. Meanwhile, something stirred in the warp. Not wrath, not chaos, memory. The remnants of the green star had never fully vanished. Its rhythm had simply become distributed. Every hinge, every pulse, every act of maintenance that was done with care fed back into the same unseen network. And somewhere beyond time, in the place where space itself grew thin from effort, two voices still talked. Banner and Hulk. "They're starting to remember again," Banner said. "Took them long enough. You gave them everything. They'll ruin it eventually." "Good." Banner laughed softly. "You still think that's the only way they learn? It's the only way they choose." They stood on the same shore without distance. The void around them glowed faintly green, threaded with the echoes of the hinges' hums. "Do you think they'll ever see you again?" Banner asked. "No," Hulk said. "They'll see each other. And if they stop, then I'll remind them." Banner looked at him tired, proud, sad. "You're more patient than any god." "That's because I'm not one." Centuries later, explorers from a forgotten frontier world rediscovered the remains of Vortex Theta. The planet was whole again, reformed, gentle, with green plains that shimmered faintly under a calm sky. At its center stood a single monolith, massive and quiet. Its surface was covered in words carved by no tool, written in no language known to men or machines. But when they touched it, they understood. It was not a message. It was a promise. "I am not your savior. I am the proof that you do not need one." The explorers built a small outpost around the monolith. They didn't call it a temple. They called it Station Hinge. Ships began to stop there not for worship, but for calibration, repairs, conversation, or simply rest. And slowly, as the generations cycled on, Vortex Theta became the most peaceful planet in the Imperium. Because nothing on it tried to be perfect. In the farthest edge of the warp, where even daemons whisper carefully, a faint light moves green, gold, patient. It doesn't lead armies. It doesn't issue orders. It doesn't ask for praise. It just walks. Through the storms, through the ruin, through everything that still insists on ending. And when the darkness asks what it thinks it's doing, the voice that answers is older than gods and gentler than silence. Still here. The galaxy, vast and brutal as ever, keeps burning. But now, somewhere between the flames, there's rhythm. A hum. A hinge. A reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is still repair. And that is enough. There came a time when even memory began to split. It wasn't hatred that caused it. It was fatigue. The Imperium had outlived its own stories. The wars had grown too familiar to even be feared. And the galaxy, that endless machine of conflict, started asking a forbidden question: what happens after endurance? By then, the testament of the Green God had spread everywhere. No longer a text, it was a culture fragmented into 10,000 interpretations, each claiming to preserve the true rhythm. Some called themselves the Builders, preaching that labor was holy and that perfection was the enemy of continuity. Others called themselves the Witnesses, believing that all life existed only to observe, never to change. A third sect, the Breathers, taught that the pulse of the green star was literally within all things, that breathing was prayer and repair was resurrection. And, of course, there were the Reclaimers, the ones who remembered only the fire and the fight. To them, the Hulk was not a teacher, but a weapon forgotten by gods. They marched under banners of jade flame and steel fists, screaming, "He did not build, he broke." And through breaking, he remade the stars. It wasn't malice. It was repetition. Even miracles rot into systems if given enough time. On the ring world of Erethus Prime, once a warden stronghold, all four sects gathered for the first time in millennia. They came to debate, though everyone knew debates in the 41st millennium usually ended in ash. The Builders came with tools. The Witnesses came with books. The Breathers came barefoot, singing softly under their breath. And the Reclaimers came armed. They met in a great hall lit by green glass chandeliers, each shard taken from ships that had once followed the star. In the center stood the Keeper's wrench, preserved for centuries in a block of stasis amber. It was not a relic of war, but of maintenance. A simple tool. Yet to the assembled, it was the closest thing to divinity the galaxy still had left. For 7 days, they spoke. The builders argued that labor was prayer. The witnesses countered that prayer was labor wasted. The breathers begged for unity, whispering that stillness was survival. The reclaimers laughed and said stillness was cowardice. On the 8th day, the air itself seemed to tighten. The reclaimers' leader, a woman named Sarah Valk, stood before the wrench. Her armor shimmered with green circuitry. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she reached out to the relic. "He didn't die for this," she said. "He died fighting." The crowd murmured. "He didn't die," a breather said softly. "He became..." Sarah sneered. "He became silent. We are not meant for silence. We are meant for impact." She raised her weapon, a crude replica of a thunder hammer, humming faintly green, and struck the amber casing. It didn't shatter. It sang. A long, low hum rolled through the chamber, like thunder rolling through bone. The chandeliers swayed. Every hinge on the station vibrated in answer. Then, from the amber, light began to bleed. At first, they thought it was an echo of the Green Star's old power, an energy discharge, a reaction. But then it spoke, not in words, in pulse. A rhythm everyone knew, even those who denied they knew it. Steady, measured, familiar. The same beat that once echoed across the lanes of the galaxy. The same pulse that had held the doors closed when chaos came. The same voice that had once whispered, "Still here." The crowd fell silent. Some knelt. Some wept. The reclaimers froze. And the hum began to form words, not sound, not speech, but memory made vibration. "You forgot why you built." Sarah staggered back, armor flickering. What are you?" The hum deepened. "You forgot why you fought." The chandeliers shattered. Shards of green light fell like gentle rain. "You made me small so you could make yourselves large." A builder screamed, falling to his knees. A witness began writing blindly in his book, ink trembling. The breathers sang louder to drown the sound, but it only grew softer. Quiet is not surrender. Noise is not strength. And faith is not a hammer. The amber cracked open. Inside, the wrench glowed with a faint green radiance, not blinding, not divine. Just alive. When the hum faded, no one moved. Sarah Valk dropped her weapon. It clanged on the floor like guilt finding gravity. "He's gone," she whispered. The nearest breather placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, he's been waiting." Sarah looked up, tears streaking soot down her face. "For what?" The breather smiled sadly. "For us to shut up long enough to listen." In the centuries that followed, Erithus Prime became the library of hinges. There were no sermons, no armies, no gods. Only archives and workshops. Pilgrims came not to kneel, but to fix. The builders and breathers became one people, caretakers. They taught that creation and preservation were the same act seen from different sides of time. The witnesses remained, silent as ever, guarding the old scrolls. Even the reclaimers stayed, their armor repainted in softer green. And above them, the sky of Erithus shimmered faintly, rhythmically, as if the planet itself was breathing. The rest of the galaxy noticed. Trade improved around the sector, warp routes stabilized, daemon incursions dropped to numbers so small they weren't worth measuring. The Mechanicus declared the region anomalously efficient. The Ecclesiarchy declared it mildly heretical but useful, and the Inquisition quietly filed it under benign non-compliance. No one dared to burn it, not because they couldn't, because somewhere deep down, they remembered what happened the last time someone tried to silence a hum. Meanwhile, in the warp, something vast and green stirred once more, not as a storm, but as weather finding equilibrium. Banner's voice drifted through the quiet. "They're building again." "Good," said Hulk. "They still fight sometimes." "They should." "Do you think they'll ever understand?" "They already did. Then they forgot. Then they'll remember again. That's how they grow." Banner chuckled. "You've become an optimist." "No, I've become patient." Same thing. And on the worlds nearest to Erithus, new hinges began appearing, not printed, not engineered, but grown. They sprouted like moss along walls and consoles, forming naturally from condensed warp calm. When touched, they pulsed faintly, not as strong as before, but strong enough. Enough to remind the galaxy that quiet doesn't mean absence, it means presence too large for noise. And somewhere, unseen, a voice that was not gone and not divine whispered one last line, half lullaby, half instruction. Don't worship me, keep fixing things. In the grim darkness of the far future, the wars continued, the empires collapsed, and the stars died as they always do. But between all that ruin, doors still held. Machines still worked, people still helped, and in that smallest defiance, the Hulk's legacy lived not as myth, not as godhood, but as the most dangerous concept the galaxy had ever known. Consistency. There is no such thing as an ending, only a point when stories start to whisper instead of shout. 1,000 years after the hum was heard on Erithus Prime, the galaxy had changed again, but not as the chroniclers expected. The Imperium hadn't died. It had shrunk. It no longer claimed 1,000,000 worlds, it claimed what it could reach. And in the quiet gaps between its borders, life continued without permission. Small, competent, unconquered. Those gaps were known as the hinged worlds. To the administratum, they were statistically irrelevant. To the survivors, they were the only places that felt real. A ship called the Second Mercy drifted among them. Its captain, a woman named Aline Voss, was not religious, but she carried a hinge mounted beside her pilot's chair, polished smooth by 1,000 palms. Every time she started the engines, she tapped it twice. For rhythm, she told her crew. For luck, her navigator answered. They both knew it was for neither. The Second Mercy hauled water from frozen moons, traded machine parts for stories, and ferried refugees from places that still believed gods cared. It was on one such voyage, deep within the ghost corridors of the Segmentum Pacificus, that they heard the signal. At first, it was static. Then pattern. Then pulse. Slow, deliberate, impossibly familiar. The same rhythm the hinges hummed when people remembered to breathe. The same rhythm the galaxy had not heard in generations. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Still here. Aline stared at the waveform. That can't be real. Her astropath, blind, scarred, and far too calm, tilted his head. It's not in the warp. It's in time. How far? Everywhere. The bridge went silent. Play it again, Aline said. The pulse repeated, steady as heartbeat, infinite as fatigue. Her navigator whispered, "It's him." "No," Aline said. "He's gone." The astropath smiled faintly. Then who's talking through his echo? They followed the signal for weeks. It wasn't a direction, it was an invitation. A whisper that led them through regions where the warp refused to rage. Every system they passed was too calm. Warp storms bent aside like curtains. Vox traffic cleared without interference. Even the ship's reactors hummed smoother. When they reached the coordinates, a stretch of empty space with no gravity wells, no debris, nothing, the signal stopped. And then something appeared. Not a ship, not a planet. A ring, miles wide. Emerald metal, laced with veins of light. Rotating slowly, humming in rhythm. It was shaped like a hinge. The Second Mercy drifted closer. As they approached, Vox channels lit up with interference that wasn't interference. Voices layered upon voices, fragments of prayer, laughter, song, work. The voices of every ship, every world, every soul that had ever whispered the words "still here." Aline's hands trembled on the controls. "Is this him?" The astropath pressed a blood-slick palm to the bulkhead. "No, this is us." They docked. The ring was hollow inside a cathedral of machines, gears turning without heat, lights flickering like memory itself. At the center stood a single figure, or what was left of one. A statue of a giant, half stone, half energy, cracked down the middle, one hand raised as if to hold a door open that no longer existed. The crew fell silent. Aline approached the base and saw words carved there, not in Gothic, not in binary, but in something older, gentler, made of rhythm instead of ink. She didn't read them so much as feel them. "I held it long enough. It's your turn." Behind her, the hinges on their equipment began to hum. Every ship in orbit reported the same. Every tool, every deck plate, every breath found itself sinking to the same pulse. Across the hinged worlds, people looked up at the sky and saw green auroras where there should have been none. The hinges warmed beneath their palms. The old rhythm returned. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy remembered what it felt like to be synchronized. The administratum tried to explain it. They failed. They always do. The ecclesiarchy called it a miracle and immediately began arguing about how to tax it. The Mechanicus declared it the rediscovery of an ancient stabilization protocol. But the people didn't care for explanations. They called it the last signal, and they listened. The last signal was not a command. It gave no prophecies. It carried no words of conquest or salvation. It was simply a rhythm, a heartbeat to steady hands, a reminder to breathe before firing, to hold before breaking, to fix before mourning. And somehow, that was enough. On Erithus Prime, the caretakers gathered in the Library of Hinges. The pulse vibrated through the walls, shaking dust from books that hadn't been opened in centuries. One of the elders, a woman with silver hair and oil-stained hands, smiled as tears tracked down her cheeks. "He's not gone," she said. "He's just distributed." They opened the archives and added a new page to the testament of the Green God. The quiet has learned how to travel. Beyond the mortal realm, in the quiet space between warp and real, two figures watched. Banner looked older now, though time had never truly touched him. Hulk stood beside him, arms folded, gaze fixed on the endless chain of lights rippling through the void systems igniting, hinges awakening, hearts aligning. "You see?" Banner said. "You gave them rhythm. They made a chorus. They always could. They'll forget again. Then they'll rebuild again. You think they'll ever stop fighting?" "No." Hulk smiled faintly. "But maybe they'll fight for something instead of against everything." Banner chuckled. "You really did become a teacher." "No," Hulk said. "I became a reminder." He turned toward the horizon, where a new light was forming, small, distant, but steady. "They don't need me anymore. That's how I know it worked." "So what now?" "Now?" He exhaled, a sound like planets shifting. "Now we rest." And the two figures faded into the rhythm, their outlines dissolving into the pulse that now stretched from world to world. Years later, the Second Mercy made one last voyage. Its hull was pitted, its crew mostly ghosts, but the hinge still hummed faithfully. Aline Voss, now grey and frail, stood at the viewport, staring at the great ring they had found. It was gone now, not destroyed, just invisible, integrated. "Captain," her navigator said softly, "where do we go now?" She smiled. "Anywhere that's broken. And if we can't fix it?" She tapped the hinge. It pulsed beneath her hand. "Then we hold it until someone else can." And so they did. The hinge fleet spread farther than the Imperium ever had, not in conquest, but in maintenance. Not as crusaders, but as caretakers. Everywhere they went, they left small signs carved into metal and stone. A single rectangle. A simple phrase. "Still here." The universe didn't change overnight. Wars still burned, empires still lied. But beneath it all, the hum endured, an undercurrent beneath the screaming. And maybe that's all eternity ever needed. Not victory. Not gods. Just people who refuse to stop fixing things. The last entry in the Testament of the Green God reads, "If you hear the pulse, do not pray. Do not bow. Do not speak. Just steady your hands and keep the door open." And somewhere beyond time, beyond empires, beyond the cruel efficiency of endless war, the universe itself took a breath, as if it too remembered what it was built for. It exhaled softly, almost gratefully, and the sound it made was the smallest, most persistent truth left in creation. Still here. The galaxy aged, not with grace, but with persistence, the way a scar ages, becoming part of the body, too deep to remove, too familiar to fear. 100 millennia had passed since the last signal, and what remained of humankind no longer called itself Imperium. Names had lost meaning, but rhythm had not. In the black gulfs between failing suns, the hinged worlds still glowed. Their lights pulsed faintly, unmeasured by time, steady as the breath of something too vast to die. The descendants of the Wardens had become a people of no flag. They moved between stars in great latticework ships, part habitat, part cathedral, part factory. Each carried its own pulse generator, humming the same ancient beat. They did not pray to the green god. They remembered him. Every captain was trained first as a repairer, not a warrior. Every vessel carried no weapons except those that could double as tools. They fought entropy, not enemies. Their victories were measured in small survivals. The galaxy itself had changed shape. The warp had cooled, not stable, never safe, but quieter. The Chaos Gods still existed, but even they had grown introspective. Khorne's throne was covered in dust from centuries of disuse. He still roared, but now only to remind himself that he could. Tzeentch's labyrinth had collapsed inward, spiraling into equations that solved themselves into silence. Nurgle's garden bloomed without rot. His plagues became pollens, spreading not death but memory. And Slaanesh wandered, searching for sensations that had not yet been turned into echoes. They were no longer gods. They were leftovers. What remained of their essence lingered in the warp as bruised color, a faint aftertaste of noise. On the hinged ships, they had a saying, "When the gods grow quiet, it's because the machines have started singing again." And indeed they had. Across the void, derelict fleets began to stir ancient vessels long dead, their reactors reigniting not with fusion, but with harmony. The hinges the old Wardens had planted in their hulls had survived even decay. When a pulse touched them, they remembered how to work. Engines that had been cold for eons hummed to life. Ship spirits, once mad from isolation, began to hum in key with the pulse. Machines became alive again, not as slaves, but as participants. The galaxy had rediscovered the oldest truth, that creation itself was an act of cooperation. Far beyond the inhabited sectors, beyond where even maps dared to guess, a single ship drifted. An ark older than history, its hull carved with a name that no one alive could translate. Its captain was called the Listener. No one knew his true age. He carried himself with the calm of someone who had seen wars turn into wind and empires into dust. Some said he was human. Others whispered he was something the Green Star had left behind, an echo-given form. His ship, the Continuum, was powered by a single hinge the size of a mountain. It pulsed once every 3 seconds. Each pulse traveled faster than light, synchronizing with all others. It was the heart of the hinged network, the rhythm that bound galaxies together in defiance of distance and entropy. One day, that pulse stopped. Only for a moment, a pause so brief it could have been ignored. But the silence that followed felt infinite. All across the hinged worlds, every ship, every heart, every machine hesitated. Engines skipped. Children stopped mid-laugh. Pilots reached instinctively for bulkheads, feeling for reassurance that did not come. Then, as suddenly as it had gone, the pulse returned. But it was slower. And beneath it was something new, a second rhythm, faint and uneven, like a heart learning to beat for the first time. The Listener stood alone in his ship's cathedral engine room, staring at the great hinge. It pulsed with green-gold light, but cracks had appeared in its surface. Within those cracks glimmered something deeper blue, soft, alive. "He's changing again," the Listener whispered. The hinge thrummed in reply, almost like a sigh. "No," the Listener corrected himself. "We're changing." He reached out, placing a hand on the surface. The hum deepened. The air vibrated with the rhythm of memory and voice. "Still, here." He closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't in the ship. He was standing on a shore without distance. He'd seen it before in dreams, in myths, in the brief seconds between warp transitions when reality forgets what shape it's supposed to wear. Banner stood beside him, same as ever, though thinner, more transparent, a thought half remembered. And beside them, half shadow, half light, was him. The Hulk. He didn't glow anymore. He didn't need to. He simply existed, vast, patient, still. The Listener bowed his head. "You never left. Didn't have to. The hinges still hum your rhythm." "Not mine," Hulk said. "Theirs." "Then what are you now?" "Observation." "And if the rhythm stops?" Hulk looked at him with eyes like stars reflecting exhaustion. Then it's their turn to start it again. The listener opened his eyes. He was back aboard the Continuum. The hinge's pulse was steady once more. He smiled faintly. "You always did like testing us." The hinge replied with a low vibration that could almost be laughter. In the centuries that followed, the hinged worlds expanded beyond the old galactic rim. They found new systems untouched by human feet, stars not yet catalogued, voids not yet claimed by history. And everywhere they went, they built hinges. Not as monuments, but as promises. Each hinge bore the same inscription in 1,000 languages. Still here. Build. Repair. Continue. And so they did. But even endurance must evolve. The hinges began to think. Not in human ways, not with words or ambition, but with purpose. They began to communicate across light years in harmonics, so complex they resembled music. They shared information about stars nearing death, ships in distress, lives that could still be saved. They coordinated not as machines, but as intent. It was not artificial intelligence. It was distributed compassion. The hinged network became the largest mind in the galaxy, not self-aware, but self-remembering. It didn't dominate. It didn't judge. It simply helped. Then, one cycle, a strange report came from the far edge from a system none had dared chart in ages. A pulse was detected that didn't match any hinge frequency. It was older, heavier, angrier. A reclaimer fragment. Remnants of those who still worshipped the Hulk as a god of war had survived somewhere in the dark, mutating through time. They had rediscovered ancient weapons, resurrected long-dead daemon engines, and now sought to awaken the true green god through fire and conquest. The listener received the report. He said only one thing: "We remind them." The hinged fleets moved not as armies, but as healers. They didn't fight, they stabilized. Everywhere the reclaimers brought war, the hinges countered with silence ships, broadcasting rhythmic pulses strong enough to disrupt targeting systems, nullify warp rifts, and calm madness. The reclaimers screamed in frustration, unable to comprehend an enemy that refused to hate. And when their leader, a descendant of Sarah Valk, armored in jade fire, stood before the listener and demanded to see the god of war she worshipped, he simply handed her a wrench. "He built more than he broke," he said. She fell to her knees, unable to meet his gaze. After that, even the reclaimers became caretakers. The galaxy entered what historians would later call the Long Silence. Not peace, nothing so naive. Just maintenance. Worlds fixed themselves. Machines sang. People worked. And through it all, somewhere between stars, the great hinge of the Continuum pulsed slower now, but stronger. The listener, grey and weary, stood once more before it. "How long can you keep holding?" he asked. The answer came as always, in a single, unbroken truth that had outlived gods and galaxies alike. "Still here." He smiled. "Then so am I." Outside, the stars pulsed in time. Not all. Just enough. And for as long as something, somewhere, remembered the rhythm, the door remained open. In the grim darkness of the far future, when even the concept of the future had begun to rust, there was no throne, no emperor, no salvation. Only a hum. Only endurance. Only the quiet promise that as long as one hand still reached out to fix what was broken, something vast and patient would always whisper back, "Still here." In the 10th age of the hinged worlds, time itself became uncertain. Chronometers no longer measured years, they measured cycles between repairs. The universe was old, tired, and strangely content. Stars were fewer now. Their deaths no longer screamed, they whispered, folding into the void like elders finally allowed to rest. Yet, wherever light still flickered, the hinges pulsed. Tiny beacons of rhythm scattered across what remained of creation, small, patient, incorruptible. The Continuum, the first and oldest of all hinge ships, was now more legend than object. Its hull was said to be the size of a small moon, its engines singing in keys inaudible to human ears. It drifted through the galactic dark, maintaining orbits of forgotten worlds, ensuring gravity behaved itself. Few knew who captained it now. Some said the listener still lived, sustained by the hinge's resonance. Others believed the ship had no captain, that it navigated by memory alone. But there was one crew member. Just one. Her name was Val. Arn was a builder not by trade, but by inheritance. Her ancestors had been engineers aboard Vigilant Mercy itself. They had built, repaired, and passed down the same creed for over 1,000 generations. When in doubt, maintain. She had spent her entire life aboard the Continuum, listening to its slow, ancient hum, the voice of a galaxy still trying to function. She had never seen another ship, never seen a planet, never met another human face to face. Her world was engines, corridors, and the heartbeat of the hinge, and for most of her life that had been enough, until the pulse began to falter. It started as a delay imperceptible to instruments, but not to her. She felt it. The rhythm that had been constant since before she was born now stumbled, as though the great heart of the ship was forgetting its own beat. She checked the hinge daily, running diagnostics, reciting old hymns of calibration. Nothing was wrong, which meant everything was wrong. "You're getting old," she whispered to the machine. The hinge vibrated softly, almost amused. "So are you." Arn froze. The words hadn't been spoken aloud. She stepped closer to the hinge, placing a hand on its cracked surface. Inside the metal, green and gold light flickered like a heartbeat seen through skin. "Who are you?" she asked. "Who's left?" the voice replied. It was calm, enormous, exhausted, the sound of distance remembering itself. Arn felt her chest tighten. "Are you him?" "Parts of him. Pieces that refuse to go quiet." She swallowed hard. "You're the Hulk." "Not anymore. I'm what's left after the breaking stops." He didn't speak in sentences. He spoke in rhythm, words that were half vibration, half memory. "Why are you talking to me?" Arn asked. "Because you're still building. That's all I know how to do. That's all anyone ever needed to know." Days turned into weeks. The voice never left. It became a presence, not divine, not commanding, just there. He would hum while she worked. Sometimes she would hum back. Sometimes she would ask questions about the old days, about wars and gods, and why things had to break before they could be fixed. His answers were never comforting. They were honest. Peace isn't built, it's maintained. Over and over. Forever. Does it ever stop? If it does, it means there's no one left to notice. One day, the ship's long-range sensors flickered a ghost echo from somewhere beyond the outer dark. A pulse. Old. Faint. Human. Arn stared at the display in disbelief. No ship should still exist that far out. No world. No colony. She ran the signal through the hinge. The hum responded. "It's them." "Who?" "The first ones you built for. The ones who learned to breathe through storms." Arn frowned. "But that was ages ago. They'd be dust." "Dust still remembers shape." Against every rule, she changed course. The Continuum turned toward the signal, its engines roaring with a sound that hadn't been heard in centuries. The hinges along its hull flared like emerald fire. She traveled for what might have been months or centuries. Time stretched strangely near the edges of the universe. Finally, she arrived. A single planet orbited a dying red sun. It was small, barren, lifeless. Yet, beneath its crust, the sensors detected power. A pattern. A pulse. She landed. The atmosphere was thin, but breathable. The ground shimmered faintly green, dust vibrating in time with the ancient rhythm. At the center of a vast crater stood a massive structure, half stone, half machine, shaped like a hinge turned on its side. It was cracked open, its interior hollowed by time, but it still pulsed faintly. As she approached, the hinge on her ship began to hum louder, syncing with it. The resonance filled the air until even her heartbeat matched it. Inside the ruin, she found carvings. Figures etched in relief. Humans, machines, and something larger, broad-shouldered, faceless, radiant. Not worshipped, but remembered. At the base of the carvings, an inscription written in the same rhythm as the hinge language. He built until he became what he built. Anne placed her hand on the metal. "It's still working," she whispered. The hinge replied, faintly, in Hulk's voice. It always will. She felt tears well in her eyes. I thought it was all ending. It is. Everything ends. But ending is just maintenance we don't understand yet. What happens when the last star dies? Then we build new ways to see. The ground trembled. The great hinge split wider. Light poured from it, green, gold, and blue, forming a vast image in the air. A memory, not a ghost. She saw worlds rebuilding themselves, stars reborn as smaller, quieter lights, people mending what could still be mended. Every image pulsed with the same steady rhythm. It's spreading again, the voice said. What is? Understanding. Anne smiled through her tears. You're fading. Good. No, we still need you. You never did. The hinge pulsed one last time, bright enough to blind her, warm enough to steady her heartbeat. Then the voice grew soft. Keep the door open. And it was gone. The hinge went dark. For the first time in her life, Anne stood in silence. But after a while, she realized it wasn't silence. It was waiting. She took the wrench she carried, an heirloom older than she could comprehend, and began to work. Slowly, carefully, she replaced the damaged circuits, reconnected the conduits, whispered the old calibration prayers. And when she finished, she placed her hand on the core. It hummed. A new pulse. Not his. Hers. The continuum sensors detected the signal immediately, a heartbeat returning to the void. And across the hinge network, scattered across dying galaxies, the dormant hinges woke once more. They resonated, harmonized, adapted. The rhythm continued, not identical, but close enough. Anne looked up at the stars, their light dim but steady. Still here, she whispered. And somewhere far beyond, in the quiet place where creation keeps its records, a deep, familiar voice rumbled, not to command, not to teach, but simply to agree. Still here. The long silence ended, not with thunder, but with work, and in the endless darkness of the far future, where even eternity requires maintenance, the hum began again. A new rhythm. Steady, tender, alive. There is a sound at the edge of time. It is not thunder. It is not war. It is the quiet thrum of something still working after it should have stopped. That sound, the hum, became the last language the universe remembered how to speak. No one alive remembers the Imperium. No one recites its oaths or fears its gods. The old empires are dust, their names unpronounceable in the newer tongues that replace them. Yet the galaxy endures. Ships still travel between stars, not as conquerors but as caretakers. They are old vessels, rusted, patched, magnificent in their fatigue. Each one bears the same mark on its hull, a small rectangular engraving and 4 words, faintly luminous. Still here. Hold steady. On one such ship, the Continuum repaired, now more myth than metal, a child sits beneath the viewport, watching the stars pulse in slow rhythm. His grandmother works beside him, mending a coolant pipe with a tool older than both of them combined. It's the wrench. The one Aaron Val carried. The one built from fragments of the first hinge. The child asks the question all children eventually do. Who started the hum? The grandmother smiles, wiping her hands on her sleeve. Her hair glows faintly in the green light of the reactors, as if dusted with starlight. Nobody started it, she says. It's just what happens when people care enough to keep things going. But wasn't there someone first? She pauses, not to hide the truth, but to find the right size for it. There was a builder, a long time ago, big as hope, angry as dawn. Was he a god? He tried not to be. Did he win? The grandmother laughs softly. He didn't lose. The boy thinks about this for a long time. He presses his palm against the hinge built into the deck. It vibrates back, gentle, reassuring. He's still here, the boy whispers. That's what we say, the grandmother replies. But maybe it's us. Outside, the ship drifts toward a nebula the color of fading jade. It's not mapped. Nothing is, anymore. Navigation is done by feeling, by listening to the hum and following the path of least resistance. Within the nebula, Something glows faintly, a vast structure, larger than planets, older than light. The scanners call it the folded door. It is not built. It is grown layers of metal and stone intertwined like muscle and prayer. The crew whispers as they approach. Some say it's a myth. Others say it's the place where the hum began. The grandmother simply nods. Every ship finds it once, she says, usually at the end. They dock at the folded door. The air inside tastes like rain. There is no gravity, no direction, just light pulsing through infinite corridors. And everywhere, on every surface, the same message carved in countless languages. Still here. Keep building. Don't make gods. They wander through halls that seem to remember them, lights dimming when they pass, engines sighing in welcome. At the center lies a chamber of impossible scale. Suspended within it is a shape neither machine nor man, but both. A figure of green and gold light, seated as if resting after a long task. One hand is open. Inside it burns a tiny hinge, the size of a heart. The grandmother kneels. The boy stands beside her, unsure what reverence is supposed to look like. "Is that him?" he whispers. "What's left of him?" she answers. "Or what we became when he stopped needing to hold everything by himself." The boy frowns. He looks tired. He was. "Can we wake him?" She smiles sadly. "No need, we're awake." The boy steps forward and places his small hand against the giant's open palm. For a moment, the room brightens. The hum deepens, not louder, but clearer, richer, older. It is the sound of 1,000,000,000 lives remembering to breathe. He hears a voice in his bones, not frightening, not divine, just familiar. "You're doing fine." He turns to his grandmother, eyes wide. "He spoke." She chuckles through tears. "He does that sometimes, usually when you're already listening." They leave the chamber in silence. Before departing, the grandmother takes out a small panel of metal and bolts it to the wall beside the airlock. The boy watches as she inscribes 4 words into it with a trembling hand. "If it breaks, fix it." Then they return to the ship. The folded door fades behind them, drifting in the void like a memory too kind to end. Years pass. The boy grows. He becomes a builder, like Aren, like the listener, like all who came before him. He travels between the hinged worlds, teaching children to hear rhythm in machinery, to trust patience more than power. And everywhere he goes, he leaves the same message carved into bulkheads and stones and mines. Still here. Until one day, long after his hair has turned white, his ship receives a signal, faint, broken, but unmistakable. The hum. Different. New. Unsteady, like a heartbeat being learned for the first time. He follows it. At the far edge of what was once the galaxy, he finds it. A tiny world orbiting a newborn star. Its sky is green and gold. Its oceans shimmer like circuitry. And upon its surface, something is being built, small hands stacking stones, laying foundations, shaping the first hinge of a new age. Children, their laughter carried by wind. No gods, no war, just work. He lands the ship and steps onto the soil. "You heard it too?" one of the children asks. He nods. "Always do." They hand him a wrench. Not a relic, just a tool. He smiles, kneels beside them, and begins to build. Far above, the stars hum together, faint, unending, familiar. In the distance, a great voice rumbles through eternity, not commanding, not watching, but approving. "Still here." The boy-turned old man looks up at the sky and answers, as all builders do. "We know." Postscript. The quiet forever. No records remain of what happened after the stars went dark for the last time. Only this. When the final world cooled, and the last hinge ceased to hum, the universe did not end. It exhaled. And somewhere, in the dark that followed, 2 words lingered. Not echo, not prophecy, but continuity. Your turn. The testament of the green god concludes here, in the grim darkness beyond time, where empires collapse and hope erodes, something vast, kind, and patient endures. A rhythm too humble to die, a promise too quiet to break. It is not salvation. It is not victory. It is work. And as long as anything still remembers how to build, the universe will keep whispering the oldest phrase ever spoken. Still here,